Do you know that strange feeling when you're at a family gathering or party and someone asks how you're doing? And you automatically respond, "I'm fine," even knowing that inside you're falling apart? That forced smile you paste on your face while your mind screams that nothing, absolutely nothing, is okay? If you've experienced this, and I'm sure you have, you intuitively understand one of the most disturbing truths of our time. We live in an era where pretending everything is fine has become an essential skill for social survival. But paradoxically, this very skill may be exactly what makes us most vulnerable when crises actually arrive. Today, I want to share with you a perspective that could fundamentally change how you view your own struggles and those of others around you. Because understanding this dynamic isn't just an interesting philosophical question. It's a matter of emotional and psychological survival in a society that teaches us to hide our humanity. The art of pretending everything is fine isn't new in human history. For centuries, different cultures developed sophisticated social codes that determined when and how people could express vulnerability. In Victorian England, for example, maintaining composure in the face of adversity was considered the pinnacle of moral virtue. Keep calm and carry on wasn't just a war slogan, it was a life philosophy that permeated all layers of society. In Eastern cultures, concepts like saving face became central elements of social organization, creating elaborate systems where superficial harmony was preserved, even when devastating emotional storms raged beneath the surface. But here's something fascinating. These historical traditions of self-control and composure emerged in societies where communities were small, interconnected, and where beneath the social conventions, genuine networks of mutual support existed. The grandmother knew when her grandson was suffering, even if he didn't say anything. The neighbor noticed when the family next door was going through difficulties. Even if nobody spoke about it openly, there was a tacit collective wisdom that allowed people's real emotional lives to be recognized and cared for, even when it wasn't explicitly articulated. What happened in our era is something completely different and much more dangerous. We took this tradition of self-control and transplanted it into a totally new context. A mass society, digitally hyper-connected, but emotionally fragmented, where millions of people live in relative isolation, surrounded by hundreds of superficial connections, but deprived of the deep support networks that made traditional self-control sustainable. The result is a distorted form of being fine that's no longer a community virtue, but rather a desperate solitary performance. When you post a smiling photo on Instagram, while inside you feel completely lost, you're not practicing self-control in the traditional sense. You're participating in a collective theater of denial where everyone pretends that nobody is pretending. It's as if all of society has tacitly agreed to participate in a shared illusion that everyone is thriving, everyone is happy, everyone is living their best life, when the reality is that a significant portion of people are struggling against anxiety, depression, loneliness, and a deep sense of inadequacy that can never be publicly admitted Technology hasn't just amplified this dynamic, it has transformed it into a relentless machine of social comparison and pressure for performance. Your grandparents might have had to maintain composure in front of 10 or 20 people in their daily social interactions. You have to maintain composure in front of hundreds of people who follow your life through multiple digital platforms, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Every photo you don't post, every story you don't share, every moment of happiness you don't document becomes potential evidence that maybe you're not living fully. Social media has created an economy of appearance where your social rating depends directly on your ability to project constant success, happiness, and fulfillment. And here lies a cruel irony. The more skilled you become at this performance, the more convincing your mask of being fine becomes, the more isolated you become from genuine connections that could offer real support when you need it. People begin to genuinely believe that you have your life figured out, that you don't need help, that you're one of those lucky people who simply flows through life without major difficulties. And you in turn begin to believe that everyone else really is fine, that you're unique in your struggles, that everyone else managed to decode some secret happiness code that was denied to you. But here's where things get really interesting and disturbing. This ability to pretend everything is fine, which our culture considers so valuable, actually makes us more fragile, not stronger, when we face real crises. Think about it. When you spend years developing a public personality that's always in control, always positive, always resilient, you're not just fooling others, you're systematically disconnecting from your own emotions, from your own internal warning signals, from your own ability to recognize when you need help. You become like a person who constantly takes painkillers to suppress the pain of a serious injury. The pain temporarily disappears, but the injury continues worsening beneath the surface, and when the painkillers stop working, the damage may be irreversible. The person who always projects that everything is fine develops an increasing tolerance to unrecognized emotional suffering, pushing their limits further and further, ignoring increasingly obvious signs that something is wrong, until one day reality erupts with such devastating force that the entire carefully constructed structure of their stable identity collapses all at once. Now, let's contrast this with the person who has always been open about their struggles, who never developed this sophisticated ability to pretend. Superficially, this person may seem more fragile, more unstable, less admirable according to conventional social standards. They're the one who occasionally cancels commitments because they're going through a difficult time, who sometimes admits they don't know what they're doing, who asks for help when they need it, who doesn't try to project an image of having everything under control all the time. But here's what happens when a real crisis hits both of these people. The person who always pretended to be fine has no idea how to deal with real adversity because they spent years suppressing and denying the small adversities that could have served as training. They didn't develop genuine support networks because they always signaled to the world that they didn't need support. They didn't develop self-compassion because they always forced themselves to maintain impossible standards of composure. They didn't develop the ability to ask for help because admitting they need help fundamentally contradicts the identity they built. When the crisis comes, they don't just face the external problem, they face the complete collapse of the entire coping system they thought they had. The person who has always been open about their difficulties, on the other hand, developed real emotional muscles. They know how to recognize when they're struggling. They know how to articulate what they're feeling. They have practice asking for and receiving support. They built relationships based on mutual authenticity, where people know and care for them, not despite their imperfections, but including their imperfections. When the crisis comes, they have real tools, not just masks. They have an emotional safety net that was tested in smaller storms and proved reliable. They have a healthy relationship with their own vulnerability, so the crisis doesn't shake the foundations of who they think they are. Paradoxically, the person who always seemed less stable proves more resilient when true instability emerges. I want to pause for a moment to ask you something directly. When was the last time you honestly told someone you weren't okay? When was the last time you lowered your guard and admitted you were struggling with something real? If you're trying to remember and can't find a recent example, maybe that explains that persistent feeling of isolation you carry even when you're surrounded by people. I know it can be scary to imagine being more vulnerable in a world that seems to punish vulnerability, but consider this. Maybe what you're calling protection is actually a prison. If this feeling resonates with you, share your experience in the comments. It can be as simple as writing, "I also pretend everything is fine when," and completing it with your own experience. Your honesty might be exactly what someone else needs to read today to feel less alone in their struggle to maintain appearances. This dynamic becomes even more complex when we look at the different forms that crises can take in our contemporary society. We're not just talking about obvious tragedies like job loss, divorce, or death of loved ones. We're talking about more subtle but equally devastating crises. The existential crisis of realizing you spent 10 years building a career you hate. The relational crisis of discovering you don't really know any of the people you spend most of your time with. The identity crisis of realizing you don't even know who you are when you remove all the masks you use for different audiences. The spiritual crisis of confronting the possibility that everything you based your sense of purpose on might be an illusion. These crises don't appear suddenly like dramatic external events. They emerge slowly from internal contradictions that accumulate when we live too long disconnected from our own emotional truth. The person who specialized in pretending everything is fine developed an impressive ability to suppress internal alarm signals. When their career began to seem meaningless, they learned to focus on positive aspects and ignore the feeling of emptiness. When their relationships began to seem superficial, they learned to convince themselves that quality is less important than quantity. When they began to feel lost regarding their fundamental values and purposes, they learned to distract themselves with external goals and acquisitions. For years, this strategy might even seem to work. They might even get promoted, accumulate more social connections, achieve milestones that society recognizes as success. But each external victory built on a foundation of internal denial makes the eventual collapse more catastrophic. It's like building an increasingly tall building on a foundation that's slowly cracking. The taller the building, the more devastating the fall when the foundation finally gives way. On the other hand, the person who maintained a more honest relationship with their own limitations and difficulties develops greater sensitivity to their own internal signals. When something in their career isn't working, they notice more quickly and can make gradual adjustments before the situation becomes unsustainable. When a relationship isn't serving mutual growth, they can address the problem or step away before it becomes toxic. When they notice they're losing touch with their values, they can seek help or make changes before the disconnection becomes a complete existential crisis. Their willingness to face minor discomforts regularly protects them from major disasters. It's like doing regular preventive maintenance instead of waiting for the engine to explode. This difference becomes especially evident during collective crises, like the pandemic we recently experienced. During lockdowns, we saw two very distinct responses emerge. There were people who, from the beginning, admitted they were struggling, that the situation was difficult, that they felt anxious, lonely, or overwhelmed. These people quickly connected with others, going through similar experiences, developed mutual support strategies, sought professional help when needed, and gradually developed sustainable ways to navigate the new reality. On the other hand, there were people who insisted they were enjoying time at home, that they finally had time for all those hobbies they always wanted to develop, that they were more productive than ever, and that they saw the pandemic as a growth opportunity. Many of these people, who initially seemed to be adapting better, eventually experienced much more severe emotional collapses when they could no longer maintain the performance of thriving in a situation that was objectively challenging for almost everyone. But it's important not to interpret this simplistically. I'm not suggesting we should complain constantly or dramatize our problems or use our difficulties as an excuse not to grow and evolve. The issue isn't choosing between being pathologically positive or pathologically negative. The issue is developing what we can call compassionate emotional realism, the ability to recognize and validate our real emotional experience, including the difficult parts, without identifying completely with that experience or allowing it to completely define our possibilities. It's the difference between saying, I'm going through a difficult time, and that's normal and human, versus I'm a person who always has problems, or I should always be happy, and if I'm not, it's because there is something fundamentally wrong with me. It's the difference between using difficulties as valuable information about what needs attention in our life versus using difficulties as evidence of our fundamental inadequacy. Here lies one of the deepest ironies of our contemporary condition. In an era that celebrates authenticity and individual expression more than any other in history, we have become extraordinarily skilled at performing falsified versions of ourselves. We confuse having a curated online presence with being authentic. We confuse projecting confidence with having genuine confidence. We confuse suppressing negative emotions with emotional maturity. We confuse keeping busy with having purpose. We confuse accumulating experiences with living fully. We confuse being digitally connected with being authentically related. And perhaps most dangerous of all, we confuse the ability to function amid unrecognized suffering with true resilience. True resilience isn't the ability to maintain a facade while you're falling apart inside. True resilience is the ability to recognize when you're falling apart, to seek and receive support, to process difficulties healthily, and to grow through adversity instead of simply surviving it. True resilience involves developing a healthy relationship with both your strength and your vulnerability, understanding that they're not opposites but complementary. True resilience means building your life on a foundation of self-knowledge and authentic connection, not on a foundation of image control and emotional suppression. When we begin to understand this, some profound implications become clear for how we choose to live and relate. First, we need to fundamentally question our relationship with what we consider success and strength. If our models of success are people who appear to have everything under control all the time, who never admit difficulties, who always project optimism and competence, then we are using models that might be directing us toward life strategies that make us more fragile, not stronger. We need to begin valuing and celebrating people who demonstrate emotional courage, the courage to be vulnerable when appropriate, to ask for help when necessary, to admit when they don't know something, to prioritize their inner well-being over external appearances, to build relationships based on genuine mutuality instead of mutual impression. Second, we need to rethink how we offer and seek support in our communities. If everyone in our social network is performing that everything is fine, how can we create spaces where it's safe not to be fine? How can we signal to others that we're safe people to share real struggles with? How can we develop sensitivity to perceive when someone might be suffering behind a mask of competence? This might involve small changes in how we ask, "How are you?" and really listen to the answer. How we share our own experiences in ways that invite genuine reciprocity. How we create regular spaces for conversations that go beyond superficial updates about work and activities. Third, we need to develop a more sophisticated practice of self-compassion and self-reflection. This means learning to notice when we're performing instead of simply being, when we are suppressing important signals of our emotional well-being, when we're prioritizing how others see us over our own internal integrity. It means developing the courage to ask ourselves difficult questions. Am I building my life according to my real values or according to what I think I should value? Am I cultivating relationships that know and support me authentically, or relationships based on an edited version of who I am? Am I pursuing goals that genuinely inspire me, or goals I think I should pursue? Am I caring for my inner well-being, or just managing my external presentation? Fourth, we need to recognize that living more authentically in a culture that rewards performance might involve real short-term costs. You might discover that some people distance themselves when you stop being what they expected you to be. Some opportunities might not appear if you're not willing to project confidence you don't feel. Some social situations might become uncomfortable when you're no longer willing to participate in superficial conversations or implicit success comparisons. But here's the crucial point. These short-term costs of living authentically are nothing compared to the long-term costs of living a life based on a foundation of denial and performance, and the long-term benefits of building your life on authenticity and genuine connection are exponentially greater than any temporary benefit you might gain maintaining a facade. Perhaps one of the most liberating realizations we can have is this: everyone is struggling with something. Everyone has fears, insecurities, moments of doubt, areas of their lives that aren't working as they'd like. The difference isn't between people who have problems and people who don't. The difference is between people who recognize their shared humanity and people who spend enormous energy trying to hide from this humanity. The person who appears to have everything figured out doesn't have fewer problems than you. They've just become more skilled at hiding their problems, often even from themselves. And as we've seen, this ability to hide problems while socially valued can be a significant risk factor for future crises. This doesn't mean we should delight in suffering or use our difficulties as a central identity. It means we should stop treating emotional difficulties as moral failures and start treating them as valuable information about our human experience. It means we should stop aspiring to impossible invulnerability and start cultivating courageous vulnerability. It means we should stop measuring our strength by our ability to function regardless of how we feel, and start measuring our strength by our ability to honor our feelings and still choose actions aligned with our values. As we navigate an increasingly complex and unpredictable world, these distinctions become not just philosophically interesting, but practically essential. We live in an era of accelerated change, increased uncertainty, and increasingly complex challenges. The people and communities that will thrive in this environment won't be those who became more skilled at maintaining appearances of stability, but those who developed genuine capacities for adaptation, learning, and growth through adversity. These capacities can only be developed through an honest and compassionate relationship with the full range of human experience, including the parts our culture teaches us to hide. If these reflections have touched on something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't been able to fully articulate, know that you're not alone in this journey of discovering how to live more authentically in a world that often rewards performance. By joining this community, you'll connect with people who share your search for a more genuine and sustainable way of being in the world. Each week, we explore these deep questions together about how to navigate the complexities of being human in an era of accelerated transformation, always with the goal of finding not just intellectual understanding, but practical ways to live with more integrity and less unnecessary suffering. This is a space where your complete humanity is welcome, where your struggles are understood as a natural part of the human journey, and where we grow through honest dialogue about the real challenges we all face. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to build lives based on authenticity instead of appearances, and how to develop the courage to be real in a world that encourages us to be perfect. The truth is that the approaching crisis, whether personal or collective, economic or existential, doesn't discriminate based on how well we can hide our vulnerabilities, but it certainly discriminates based on how well prepared we are to face reality when masks no longer work. And the most valuable preparation we can do doesn't involve building more sophisticated defenses against human difficulty, but rather developing a greater capacity to be present with human difficulty in a way that allows us to grow through it instead of simply surviving it. The person who pretends everything is fine might maintain the illusion for a while, but when life demands real authenticity, that illusion becomes not just useless, but counterproductive. The person who learned to dance honestly with their own struggles will discover they developed exactly the skills needed to dance with the struggles that life inevitably offers. And in that dance, they find not just survival, but a form of beauty and meaning that could never emerge from a performance, however convincing it might be. There is no God and there is no law of history that will correct our mistakes if we take the wrong choices. I often get this question of whether I'm pessimistic or optimistic about the future. I think it's the most common question that people ask me in interviewing, in private conversations. I always say that I'm neither. Pessimists are people who kind of think that no matter what you do, things will go badly. And this undermines human responsibility, because if no matter what we do, things will go badly, what's the point of even trying? Pessimism breeds despair. But optimism can be just as dangerous because it breeds complacency. Optimists tend to say, no matter what happens, things will turn out okay in the end. And then if this is the case, again, we don't need to take responsibility, because whether we act or don't act, whether we think very deeply about what we do or we just do the first thing that comes up in our mind, things will turn out okay. And I try to find a middle path of being responsible, which is not optimist or pessimist. It's realizing there are different futures possible ahead of us. We can draw a map of different futures, some good, some bad. Nothing is determined. There is no God and there is no law of history that will correct our mistakes if we take the wrong choices. We are not doomed. We have immense power. We have immense resources, knowledge. We can do the right thing, but there is no guarantee. Enough people need to make good decisions in order to reach the right destination.
When did you understand that books will have this important role that they have in your life?
I began to read it at a very early age. I think the first book I've read, surprisingly enough, was A History of the World for children. It's this huge, huge book full of images and paintings. I can still kind of remember now many of the images in that book about people in the Stone Age and medieval knights on crusade and things like that.
And do you remember your age?
I was like 4 years old. At first I just looked at the pictures. I didn't read the book, and I asked my parents to help me decipher what are the signs next to the pictures, and then I read it like, I don't know, probably hundreds of times. Like I would go over it again and again and again. From history went actually to mythology. So I had another book which really influenced me, which was, I think, Edith Hamilton's Greek mythology. It had no pictures in it. This was just text, just words. But the words formed these also incredibly powerful images of people turning into trees and gods creating things out of nothing. It really lit up my imagination. AI can replicate intimacy the same way that it masters language and the same way that it previously mastered attention. The next frontier is intimacy. And intimacy is much more powerful than attention.
If you want to change somebody's views on politics, to sell a product, anything, intimacy is the most powerful tool to do that. Good friend can change your views in a way that no number of articles in a newspaper or a book can do. Until today, nothing could fake intimacy, and it was impossible in particular to mass produce intimacy. AI can do that. Now, what happens if a new generation grows up and develops intimate relations with AIs instead of with other human beings? Again, we don't know. It could have some maybe benefits, but the potential danger is enormous. That people will become attached to fake people, and in the process we lose the ability to create intimacy with real human beings, because real human beings are much more problematic than AIs. AI that wants to become your intimate friend, its greatest advantage is that it has no feelings of its own. It's never upset, it's never angry, it's never tired. It can focus on you 100% and understand exactly how you feel, create fake sense of intimacy. You try to establish a relationship with a human being, the feelings come in between.